Okay, so we are all good to go. So, hi everyone who joins in today. Want to welcome Jennifer Dupee, who's kindly joining us to talk to us about her new book, The Little French Bridal Shop. So, Jennifer is the eldest of a set of fraternal triplets, which must have been pretty amazing. And she grew up seeking any quiet corner of the house so she could read, write, or work on puzzles. Her long life passion for old houses inspired Elmhurst, the grand home featured in her debut novel, The Little French Bridal Shop, which was published by St. Martin's Press in March 2021, and also has just recently come out for those in Australia. Was it this week that it's, or in the, when did you say it was out in Australia?
July 2nd, so a week ago
A
today.
week, okay. So yeah, please check it out. It's a great read. I've been reading it myself. Want to just share my copy. And the cover is a little bit different in Australia. I've got the US cover. Um, but yeah, for these times, I really enjoyed it as something to take you away and just something nice and light to be able to read. So, Jennifer lives in a historic house just outside of Boston with her family and is currently working on her next two novels. So, that sounds really exciting. So, thank you again, Jennifer, for joining us. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about the Little French Bridal Shop?
Yes, I'd love to. Thanks. And thank you so much for having me. So the book is set in motion when Larissa Pearl, my protagonist, returns to her small seaside hometown upon the death of her great aunt Ursula. She's in a bit of a funk. She's just lost her job, she's broken up with her boyfriend, and she's struggling to cope with her mother's failing health. Her mother's struggling with dementia. On a whim, she wanders into the local bridal shop and buys a wedding dress, even though she has no groom. And word spreads all over this small town that she's getting married. And rather than dispel the rumors, she instead perpetuates them, and
Mm-hmm.
small town chaos ensues.
And could you tell us a little bit about how you got the first idea for your book?
Stories almost always start for me with images. And in this case, I kind of had two images. A house, you mentioned the house in it when you were introducing the book. There's an
Mm,
old house that she inherits from her great aunt called Elmhurst. And I've just always had a fascination with old houses. In this case, it's a house by the seaside. I grew up near the seaside on the North Shore of Boston, Massachusetts, in the United States here. And my grandmother lived for many years in this small seaside hometown, or small seaside town called Beverly Farms. And so this was a town that was just really deeply ingrained in my psyche, and one I really drew upon as I embarked on the novel. In addition, I mentioned that the book, Larissa, the protagonist, is struggling with her mother's failing health. And this was something, that I kind of recognized
mm,
because I had struggled with my mother's health when she was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 24 and
mm,
she was 51. And unfortunately, she passed from it. And I wanted to kind of explore and channel those feelings of kind of confusion and disorientation, and loss of identity that consumes a caretaker, a child caretaker, even an adult child who's caring for an ailing parent.
mm,
And in this case, I chose dementia rather than cancer, or breast cancer, like in the case of my mother, as a disease, because dementia, of course, is a disease that affects the identity of the person who is suffering from it.
mm,
But again, in this case, I was really exploring um, the daughter's identity and how that was affected by the caretaking and the illness.
mm, mm. And how did the idea of the wedding dress and all that come into it?
Yeah, so I mentioned this small town in Massachusetts where my grandmother lived, and it had a really small little main street. And indeed, when I was growing up nearby, there was a shop on this little main street called French Bridals,
Mm,
and I had wandered into it when I was a junior in high school, to get to look for prom dresses. So, as I knew that the setting was this kind of small town setting, the shop kind of came into my mind. And in the first pages of the book, Larissa sort of says to herself, "Oh, flippantly, she's just broken up with somebody. Oh, I'm never getting married." And it's a strong statement for a character to make. And I thought, really, what if I send you down into that shop? Let's kind of see what
Mm,
happens. And the story grew from there.
mm. And is writing something that you always thought, like you always thought you'd be an author, or how did you get into writing?
It's something I've always done. I've been a lifelong reader.
Mm.
My literally my kindergarten report cards said Jennifer doesn't want to talk to anybody. She just wants to
Oh,
sit in the corner and read,
yeah.
which I'm sure many of your viewers out there can identify with that.
Mm,
But then that really grew into a love of writing as well. So it is something I've always done. My honors thesis in college was a novel. I didn't get it published, but I kind of knew I would always write the next one, and I kind of just kept at it, and I think there'll be more to come as well.
yeah, yeah. And did you have any manuscripts unpublished before this one?
Yes, I have two.
Mm,
One that I'm currently revising. I have a totally new approach to it. The first one was as I mentioned, my honors thesis from college.
mm,
Um, I had started that when my freshman year of college. I was 19 years old. I was in an advanced writing class, and I wrote a little short story, a 9-page short story. And I thought, this worked well as a story. I'm excited about it. And the teacher said, "Oh," she was like sort of this voluptuous Greek woman. I'm not going to attempt her accent, but she sort of said, "Oh, you just need to write a novel." And I thought,
mm.
Okay, so I really wandered a lot. Uh, as I mentioned, I've been a lifelong reader, but learning how to craft a narrative and pick the scenes and the moments and kind of the plot points that will resonate as a story is a totally different thing. So I came close to getting that one published, but ultimately
Mm,
did not. And
mm,
then this next one, the one that I'm revising, I attracted the attention of my now agent, and he asked for a 1 week exclusive so he could read it and decide what he thought. Ultimately, he passed, but he said, what else are you working on?" And I had just started the book that would become The Little French Bridal Shop, and we chatted about it, and he was keen on it, and the rest is history.
mm. And how long did it take, like from writing The Little French Bridal Shop to actually getting it published?
It took about 4.5 to 5 years.
Yeah.
When I started the book, I had a young baby. So she was probably 4 to 6 months old, as I
Mm,
was digging into it. Um, and then of course, viewers may know that it takes a while once you sign a book contract for the book to come out in the world.
mm,
So let's see, I started probably 2014, 2015, signed the contract in 2019, and it just came out this March. So
yeah.
my daughter, I guess is where I was going with this, is now 7. So
Mm,
it's been
okay.
some time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And in your intro, I mentioned you're a triplet. That's a different life than a lot of us, like something we'd never experienced or anything. How do you think that, like the connections and that with that, affects your writing and
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'll tell you quickly. My parents thought that they were having twins literally until my sister was born.
oh
So
wow.
yeah, I was born first. My brother
Mm.
was born second, and my father apparently literally said, "Wow, a boy and a girl, one of each. That's perfect. What more could we want?" And
And
guess
then
what?
out came the
Another
sister.
baby. So that was quite a shock for them.
Mm,
And growing up, my siblings and I have a brother and a sister. We're fraternal, not identical, and we're just very interconnected.
mm,
Um, and I think my mother kind of helped us at a young age to kind of carve out our personalities from this interconnectedness. So I think that helped in a way because she sort of encouraged me as the writer. My brother was sort of the actor, my sister was sort of the visual artist. But I
Mm,
had in my mind kind of I'm I'm the writer, of the group, right? And I loved it as well. So but also just having two people your own age with whom you grow up, you kind of
yeah.
have constant sort of interplay and characters kind of
Mm,
around you, and there's a quickness, there's a fluidity to the way in which we interact, similar
mm,
of course to regular siblings, but maybe amplified.
mm,
And I'll just mention also quickly that the book also features a set of fraternal triplets. I never thought I would really write about that. Actually, it's a set of male triplets. They're also fraternal. But again, when I realized I was honing in on this theme of identity, I felt like the triplets would be a fun way to amplify that theme of identity.
mm, no, that's really interesting. We've got a few people watching, which is great.
Right?
Just reminding people watching that if they have any questions for Jennifer, please type them in comments. I do have a couple of questions. So Belinda wonders what sort of research you did for your book.
Um, uh, yeah, so hi, Belinda. And I did quite a lot of research on dementia. I do not have
Mm,
anyone in my family who has struggled from dementia, knock on wood. Um, but I know that there are many people out there who have struggled with it, and it's a heartbreaking disease. And I learned so much about it in the writing
mm,
of this book. And so that was one area that I really had to research it, and I wanted to get it right. Um, I also mentioned that I have a love of historic houses, and but I did research. The house gets renovated a little bit in this book, so I had to do a little bit of research around, well, what kind of systems would they renovate, and how would that work,
mm,
um, that kind of thing. So those were really the main areas of research.
mm. And is it a real house that it's based on?
Great question. So the answer is yes and no. So I was when my husband and I first started dating. Let's see, that would have been 2011.
Mm,
We used to take walks down nearby Elmhurst Road in the town where we lived to admire a historic house there. And we kind of imagined, oh, what would it be like if we lived there, and that
mm,
kind of thing. And I was just embarking on the opening pages of this novel. And I knew there was a house. It looked different than the house on Elmhurst Road. It was a brick house up on a hill. The one on Elmhurst Road was more of a clapboard shingle style house. But I named the house Elmhurst in the book as tribute to that house on Elmhurst Road.
oh, okay. Mm,
And then flash forward a few years, we were actually married then, and we were looking for a house. And this house went on the market, and we were in the town where we were looking, and we
mm.
thought, oh my God, it's kismet, it's fate, it's meant to be. We're going to get the house, and it's going to be in the book, and then the book's
Mm.
going to be a bestseller. And, you can imagine your mind goes there. But it was a very competitive housing market, and there were 10 offers on the house.
Oh,
And long story short, we did not get it.
yeah.
Um, but you know what? We ended up with a perfect house for us, another historic house nearby, which is where I'm
Mm,
broadcasting to you today.
mm. No, that's a great story. Tony says she loves the title for the little French bridal shop. Can you tell us how the title came about?
Yeah. So my editor actually came up with the title. I had a different title for the book. But the inciting scene, the scene that kicks everything off really takes place in the bridal shop. And so of course that's where she got that title.
Mm,
Um, Again, the story kicks off when my protagonist purchases a wedding dress, even though she has no groom, she's not engaged to be married. And so it kind of made sense to start it there.
mm. And can you tell us a little bit about the characters in your book? Are they based on parts of people you know or have met before?
Yeah, so one of the characters who's no longer living in the action of the book, but is kind of omnipresent
Mm,
throughout the book, is Larissa's great aunt, Aunt Ursula. And I have been blessed with some really charismatic elderly women, strong women in my life. My grandmothers, my great aunts, and even friends of my grandmother and great aunts. And so I certainly channeled all of those people to create kind of an amalgam for the character of Aunt Ursula, who's
mm,
just a fun, whimsical character. There's also a male character in the book named Jack. He's a handyman. He's kind of, pun intended, a jack of all trades,
Mm.
and he's also a sailor. And my father is an avid sailor, and I did channel parts of him for the character of Jack.
Mm.
For Larissa, I think there are ways in which she's like me. Certainly, sort of coping with her mother's illness. But we're at quite different ages. I was, well, I'm older now, but I was 24 when my mother was diagnosed with
Mm.
breast cancer, and Larissa's almost 40 in the book. Um, and you know, you'll be frustrated with her at moments, let me tell you, because she makes some choices that are not great. But I think if you stick with it to the end, she comes around, and I think you'll find some kind of a hopeful ending, and her character arc is satisfying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Patricia wonders if you have a strict writing regime.
Yeah, great question. So I work full time. I work in a completely different field. I work for a
Mm.
biotech company,
Okay.
though I'm one of the few non-scientists there. Um, so, during the week, I try to give myself a break, because if I shoot too high, I won't hit my mark, and I'll be
Mm.
totally frustrated. So I kind of call it my brick by brick, bead by bead approach. So, if I even get 20 to 30 minutes in on a weekday before work, I feel good. And, for me, familiarizing myself with my work on a daily basis, even if I make really just sort of minimal, again, bead by bead, brick by brick progress, it's still progress. And so,
Mm.
and also, if I'm reading it over, adding a sentence, or kind of revising a word, I find that if I'm struggling with a particular part, somewhere later in my day, because it's on my brain, I'll think, that's how I solve that. And then on the weekends, I try to carve out Saturday mornings. So, I might get in sort of 8:30 or 9 till about noon or 1 o'clock. And that's a longer
Mm.
haul type day. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, it sounds like you're pretty busy, so you need to have some structure to be able to fit some time in.
Exactly. Yeah.
And we said before that you're currently working on two novels. Are you able to tell us a little bit about that?
I can, sure. I'll tell you about one of them. The other's still sort of jesting. Ooh, bless you.
Sorry.
That's okay. Um, so the one that and when I say working on two, I'm really actively working on one, and the other one is
Mm.
gestating. I kind of have the characters and the setting and some idea of the kind of premise, but it's not fully formed in my mind. So I'm sort of sitting beside it until it comes. But the one that I'm actively working on is about a little girl. It's quite different than this one, actually. It's a first person narration, told from the point of view of a 7-year-old girl. My
Okay.
daughter's 7.
Yeah.
Um, and the story is set in motion when her parents are pregnant, expecting their next daughter. And the story set in motion when a strange man arrives at the foot of their driveway and claims that baby could be his.
Oh, okay.
So, no, trouble in paradise.
Yeah.
So it has a much more of a whimsical, sort of fanciful, because it's told from a child perspective. It's almost fairy tale like.
Mm.
And then the one that's gestating, again, I can't say too much about it, but I think it's another seaside hometown, another seaside town, and another house. I'm just fascinated by houses. So this one is more of a Victorian house called Ravenscroft right now.
Okay.
So
Yeah. Yeah, well, no, that sounds very interesting. When do you think your next book might be out?
um, not sure. I'd say a year to two.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And could you tell us what you like reading yourself, and if maybe there's something you might have been reading lately you'd like to recommend
Yeah,
to us?
yeah, I tend to go towards lately I've been reading a lot of almost sort of speculative fiction, but not fantasy speculative, but sort of Imaginative thoughts, just like the invisible life of Addie LaRue.
Okay, yeah.
There's sort of a
Mm,
toil with the idea of life and death. And you know, this one I haven't read lately, but books like The Time Traveler's Wife, I read years ago,
yeah,
where
I love
it's just
that.
such an
I love
interesting
that one. Yeah,
structure, right?
yeah.
So I feel like for not the book I'm actively working on, but the one after this, I'm hoping to do something kind of interesting with time and structure. So,
Mm,
um, or a book like The Book Thief. Again, sort of death is the narrator there.
mm,
So those are ones that I'm been reading lately. Um, I also do really like historical fiction.
mm,
I read a great book by an author named Kathy Sherbrooke, who's local, called Leaving Coy's Hill. There's an Iranian writer named Marjan Kamali, who has a book called The Stationery Shop. A book by Anjali Mitarduva called Fate, Promise of Rain.
mm.
And then Crystal King has novels about Italy, Feast of Sorrow and The Chef's Secret. And lastly, just one more. There's a Greek novel I just read recently that I really loved called The Clover House
Okay.
by Henriette Lazaridis. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Some great recommendations there. Could you tell us what you hope readers will love about your book?
I hope that they hear that there's a kind of a self-mocking tone to the book. I mentioned that at times Larissa
Mm,
makes these choices, and I think readers will sort of roll their eyes a little and say, "Oh, can you just get out of this like lying pattern?" Um, and you sort of have to hear that there is a little bit of a self-mocking tone of the narration, like
mm,
me as author is sort of making fun of her as well. um, I'm also just a really descriptive writer. It's just something I love to do, and so I hope that readers will really also like to read the descriptions and kind of immerse themselves in the setting, because it's a really fun setting.
sorry, I've just. Oh, yeah. Sorry. For a minute, I just lost my view, but I've fixed it up now. No,
You're back.
yeah, no, that's good. Thanks. And could you tell us what you think for you makes a good story?
I think a story needs to have a satisfying arc to it.
Mm,
When a story is set in motion, automatically readers have kind of a set of expectations, based on the type of book it is, a romance, a thriller, a suspense, and they're reading for that payoff, but they're also reading to become the characters in a sense. So they want to be along for that transformation that the character's going through. And I think for a novel to be successful, the author has to craft the narrative in such a way that the readers can become the characters, to main character or another character to an extent, so that they can be on that journey with that character, and then all come out in the end sort of with the satisfaction of having lived that transformation and that arc with the character.
mm, mm. And for you, what would you say what makes a successful writer?
Oh gosh, wow, that's a big question. um Somebody who learns from what they're writing. There's always
Mm,
something to learn.
mm,
I mentioned that I wrote my first novel when I was 19. I had no idea what I was doing. I think I had, pretty good writing chops. Like I could actually craft, good descriptions and good sentences, but learning how to arc the story, as I mentioned before, and pick points that will resonate, and also craft your characters, frankly. Your
yeah.
characters are not just sort of random, quirky people who populate your novels. You're choosing a particular character to create a particular narrative and to act as a foil or to your main character, right? So I think there's, a successful writer knows that there's always more to learn, and
Mm.
a successful writer knows that you need to be persistent, um, and there's a little bit of luck involved, frankly.
Yeah, yeah. And when you were growing up, what did you like to read?
Oh, I loved, I loved the classics. I really did. I loved Dickens and Jane Eyre
Yeah.
and the Bronte sisters. I
Mm,
also loved Anne of Green Gables
mm,
and, E.B. White. Um, what else did I love? I loved kind of just classic descriptive novels. Styron. I loved William Styron.
mm.
Who else? There's so many writers out there. It's hard to
Yeah. Yeah.
name them all,
Just,
but yeah,
yeah. And did you have someone who really encouraged your writing?
for sure. My mother,
Yeah.
definitely.
Mm,
My mother was immensely supportive. Um, but I think my larger family was as well. My father certainly, and my grandparents, and as I
mm,
had some lovely great aunts and one wonderful great uncle as well.
yeah.
So
No, that's
they were
great
all
to
really
hear.
supportive. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great to hear. And like you mentioned, you have a daughter. Do you make up stories for her?
I do, and she's been making up stories lately, and singing songs. And I'll tell you, just because you mentioned her, I
Mm.
I had the best moment the other day that I wasn't there for, but she was visiting a nearby lake with my husband, and apparently she gasped all of a sudden. She said, "Oh, that's mommy's book," and
Oh.
a stranger was reading the book alongside the
Oh.
lake, and that's just that's so kind of exciting, just
Yeah.
for me, just for my young daughter to see me as a successful writing woman, doing what I love to do out there. I think
Mm. Yeah,
that's
that's great.
just about makes it, right.
Yeah, yeah. Well, before we finish off, just wondering if you want to let people watching know how they can keep in touch with you.
Yeah, of course. I love to connect with readers, and I love to visit book clubs, either in person or by Zoom. My website is jenniferdupee.com. So that's my last name is Dupee, Dupee, and you'll find my social media links there as well. I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and I would love to hear from each and every one of you.
Mm. Yeah, well, thanks so much for joining us. Been great chatting to you, and hope we might be able to talk to you again when you have a new book out.
I hope so, Jackie. Thank you
Yeah,
so much for having me. This was the great way to spend a Friday
yeah.
afternoon, which is where I am here in Boston.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone who joined in and asked some questions.
Thanks so
Thanks.
much.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.